So very good afternoon to all of you. So I'm going to talk about our UR experience in Mangla field, and the topic of this session is also enhanced oil recovery in mature fields. I mean, even though as industry professionals we understand the importance of UR and how it can improve recovery, but if you look globally, I mean, still the UR applications are very small, very limited, and there are multiple reasons, both technical, commercial, as well as I would say lack of EOR culture in many companies, due to which the application of EOR has not kind of taken off. So in today's presentation, basically I'm going to take you through our experience in polymer flood in Mangala field, and then also talk about the roadmap going forward, how we are kind of progressing gradually, and how we plan to take the recovery, the technical ultimate recovery in Mangla field to almost 60% and beyond. So in this presentation, I'll start with a brief introduction about the field, and then I'll take you through the development history of Mangla, the UR journey particularly, and then also focus on some of the reservoir management practices that we have been following to keep this UR successful, to achieve higher recoveries, the roadmap ahead, and end with some concluding remarks. So as I said, most of the discovered fields, we know that worldwide today, they are in a mature state. But still, the number of EOR applications, all of us understand that they are very limited. The global average recovery factor is still around 35% only. The price of EOR is quite big. And if you go by some industry estimates, of course, it's slightly older. But if you go by the World Energy Outlook by IEA of 2018 report, what they are saying is that the total EOR production as of today is still around 2% of the global oil supply. There are about 350, 400 odd UR projects, big UR projects, which are currently in application. And the total UR contribution is still something like 2 million barrels, around about that number. So there are multiple hurdles why industry has not adopted EOR for many of the fields, and some of them are listed here. There is a lack of systematic approach by many companies. And also there is a lot of high capital that is required to go for any EOR. And also the returns are not very quick. I mean, it takes some time for the EOR to be effective, and your returns take time. There is long lead time. Already some of the presenters talked about that. Anywhere between 5 to 10 years if you are looking at a big UR project. Going from a plan, implementing it at a pilot scale, then expanding to full field, I mean, that takes time. Also in industry, there is a belief that EOR has to be adopted in mature fields. So many of the younger fields which have not much of history, I mean, not many people think of going for EOR in the early stages. But then as the fields age, there are many other challenges. There are challenges with the integrity of the wells, facilities, and so other challenges come into play. EOR is kind of a niche, kind of an area. It's kind of resting with a few oil companies and few service companies. And therefore, the skills required for implementation of EOR are quite limited. And that's also kind of a hurdle for many companies to adopt EOR technologies. Cairn kind of identified the need for EOR for its Rajasthan fields, the big Rajasthan fields like Mangla, Bhagyam, Aishwarya, soon after the discovery, and primarily because they are kind of moderately viscous. And we understood that a simple water flood would not be very efficient, and we would be circulating a lot of water. So at the beginning itself, we started to look for EOR methods for these fields. And together, these three big fields, Bangla, Bhagyam, Aishwarya, which we collectively call as MBA fields, have a total discovered in place of 2.2 billion barrels. And we have been doing polymer flood since 2015, almost like 8 years now. And, and the same polymer flood has been adopted in the other two fields, Bhagyam and Aishwarya. And collectively, we have produced something like 150 million barrels of incremental oil through polymer. And going forward, we are looking at application of ASP in a staged manner in these fields. And we kind of estimate that the incremental potential is of the order of around 300 million barrels in these fields. Just to give a brief overview of the larger Bangla field discovered in 2004, put on production in 2009 within 5 years. Basically, it's a simple tilted fault block. And the reservoirs are basically of the Fatehgarh formation, very high quality, high permeability, multi-dasi kind of reservoirs. They have very low connate water saturation. The initial water saturation in these fields are typically about 5 to 10%. The oil is moderately viscous, typically around 10 to 20 centipoise. The in-place discovered in Mangla is something like 1.3 billion barrels, and already we have recovered something like 510 million barrels from this field, which is like 37% of the discovered in place. Just a brief description of the reservoirs that we have in Mangala. Basically, the Fatehgarh is divided into two units, the lower Fatehgarh and the upper Fatehgarh. The lower Fatehgarh reservoirs are basically sheet floods. They're kind of braided channel sands, and both highly connected, both in terms of laterally as well as vertically. Whereas the upper Fatehgarh, they are low net to gross, kind of sinuous meandering channel sands with a typical net to gross of around 20 to 50%. But in terms of quality, both the reservoirs are high permeability, multi-dasis. So in terms of development, we started with a pattern flood, water injection for the upper Fatehgarh and kind of peripheral water injection for the lower Fatehgarh. So the field was put on water injection for initial pressure maintenance. The initial 5 years from 2009 to 2014, we were doing water injection. And this was kind of hot water because the oil is having wax content and has a high pour point of 45 degrees centigrade. So, and in situ, the wax appearance temperature is like 60 degrees. So all the time we were doing hot water injection to prevent any wax precipitation. So after 5 years of water injection, because of the mobility contrast between the viscous oil and water, the water cut increased sharply, and which was expected. So in 2015, we started polymer injection in Mangala. And what we did is we converted the inverted 9 spots into 5 spots by drilling more infill wells. And the average well spacing was reduced from something like 400 to 500 meters to about 250 to 300 meters. So I'll kind of skip this, the basic mechanism slide, because already it has been spoken by the previous speaker. So the polymer flood is just targeting the mobility contrast, and by adding polymer, we are increasing the viscosity of the water and trying to improve the displacement efficiency, the sweep efficiency. On the other hand, the ASP is basically a mixture of 3 chemicals: alkali, surfactant, and polymer. And the alkaline and the surfactant kind of synergistically act on the oil, and they reduce the interfacial tension and thus help in improving the oil recovery. So this particular plot is showing the performance so far that we achieved in Mangala. So the plot on the left is showing the total field performance. The curves on the top are showing water production and oil production. Oil in green and blue is water. And the plots on the lower side, they are showing the injection. The dark blue shows water injection, and yellow shows the polymer injection. So as you can see, we started polymer injection in 2015, and currently we are almost like 95% polymer injection across all the layers in Mangala. The plot on the top right is showing the incremental recovery that we achieved so far. If we had continued with water injection, we would have followed the blue curve. And because of polymer injection, what we are achieved is along the red curve. And that area between the two is the incremental oil that has been produced through polymer EOR. And we currently estimate that in last 7 years, we have recovered more than 100 million barrels in Mangla alone. And that is like 7 to 8% of incremental recovery. And what we expect is that by the end of field life, this would be in excess of 10% incremental recovery. And the plot on the bottom right is also showing the same thing in terms of water-oil ratio. And you can see the impact of polymer from water-oil ratio of around 5, we kind of reduced because of polymer injection. And as expected, then the water cut started increasing gradually. So this is the kind of centralized facility that we have in Mangala. So this centralized facility kind of creates a concentrated mother solution of 15,000 ppm. And this concentrated mother solution is kind of distributed to all the well pads spread across the field, and where it is kind of diluted with the injection water. And viscosity is brought down to something like 20 to 30 centipoise at the wellhead. And what we target is the in situ viscosity of around 20 centipoise, because our oil is also of similar kind of viscosity, 15 to 20 centipoise. So currently, I mean, this facility can produce something like 100,000 barrels of mother solution. And after diluting with the injection water, the total injection capacity is of the order of 500,000 barrels per day. So that's the kind of large facility, almost one of the largest facilities operating anywhere in the world at a single location. So what we saw in terms of incremental recovery from the polymer flood, that has been possible because there is a lot of focus in terms of reservoir management. A lot of data is collected in terms of reservoir surveillance and trying to understand where the injection is going, what all layers are getting swept. Because Mangla is kind of a multi-layered fluvial channel system, so a lot of heterogeneity. So we need to track, I mean, where our injection volumes are going, which layers are being swept, what is being left behind. So a lot of data is acquired in terms of RSTs, PLTs, pressure fall-off tests to understand this displacement. And then corrective steps are taken so that we can uniformly sweep all the layers and all the areas. And there is a balanced kind of injection in all the patterns. Voidage replacement is there, pressure is being maintained. All those factors are kind of taken care of on a regular basis. Again, this is showing the value of integration. All the data is we try to integrate, as I said, to understand the sweep that the polymer flood is resulting in. So you can see the plot on the right side. That is showing all the RST data that is acquired in the wells. So you can see, I mean, there are a series of RSTs being acquired in a single well just to understand the time-lapse saturation changes in the reservoir, and also to understand how differentially the layers are being swept and what corrective actions can be taken to improve the sweep and displacement. Similarly, in a polymer flood, it's also very essential to understand the quality of polymer that we are injecting, whether it is meeting the required specs or not. So a lot of data is collected right at the central facility as well as at different locations in the network, right up to the wellhead. And we try to see whether there is any degradation in the polymer viscosity. So a lot of data is collected at the wells to understand the viscosity degradation. Similarly, not only at the surface, but we also try to collect in situ samples just to understand after polymer has resided in the reservoir for some, let's say 6 months or 1 year, whether it is losing its viscosity and is it as per our studies or it is more. So, and then we are also evaluating different chemistries of polymer molecule which can have greater stability when it stays in the reservoir for long periods of time. So those are also being kind of tested in the field to get better performance. Also, in terms of reservoir characterization, a lot of work is done to kind of improve our static models and reservoir models, again, to have a better understanding of the polymer performance. And over the last 15 years of the field production, there have been 10 generations of model created at different points in time to improve our understanding of the field performance. So the next phase of development, we are looking at going beyond polymer. We also tested the alkaline surfactant polymer process in Mangala field using this 5-spot pattern. It's a closely spaced pattern of 100 meters by 100 meters between the injectors. And we were testing one of the layers of FM1 to understand how ASP chemicals are going to work in Mangala. And within the pilot, we had observation wells to understand the saturation changes with time. And as I said, continuously RSTs were being measured. And also at the end of the pilot, we kind of evaluated the residual saturation left after ASP. So as I said, this is basically a combination of an alkali, combination of two surfactants, a sulfate and a sulfonate kind of class of surfactants, and polymer. And together, they kind of reduce the interfacial tension and improve recovery. So this is the summary of that performance in the pilot. As you can see, this pilot was done in an area which was already polymer flooded, and we were already producing more than 90-95% water cut. So the blue dots are showing the water cut response. So once we started ASP injection, the water cut dropped from 90% to as low as 20-30%. And this low water cut remained for almost 3 to 4 months, and then gradually increased as expected. And you can see the central producer, which was in the center of the pilot. Initially, it was producing at 50 barrels. And once we did ASP, it jumped to almost 300, 350 barrels. So the incremental recovery, what we estimate from the pilot is something like 20 to 25% incremental recovery over polymer flood. And the total recovery in the pilot area is estimated to be in excess of 75%. So it's kind of unbelievable. Most people would not believe that you can get such kind of recoveries. But then this is a limited, confined pilot, and it was being tested in one layer. And the residual saturation after the ASP pilot came down to as low as 5 to 10%. And I said in the beginning that our initial saturation in Mangala is like 95% oil saturation. So after ASP flood, that came down to less than 10%. So that's the kind of recovery you can get through ASP process. But of course, I mean, to replicate it on a large field is not that easy. So we expect that if we do it in a field level, our recoveries would be in excess of 15 to 20% incremental recovery through ASP. So this is showing the kind of incremental potential that we have in terms of EUR in the MBA fields. The other two fields, Bhagyam and Aishwarya, they are very similar in character to Mangala. Maybe there are some subtle changes between the fields, but in terms of fluid and rock characteristics, they're all similar. So our estimate is that polymer would give something like 8 to 10% incremental recovery. ASP, we already demonstrated that at least at a pilot level, we got 20 to 25% incremental recovery. So the plot on the right is showing that incremental potential. If we kind of able to roll out ASP across the three fields, then this is the potential that we see, almost like 300 million barrels of incremental recovery in the three fields. Of course, I mean, ASP is a complex process. It's also expensive. So a lot of kind of incentives and favorable policy interventions are required from the government and the regulators to make this kind of a viable project. Just to touch upon some of the EUR policies, we know that Government of India has already come out with an ER policy. But then many of the terms are not really kind of conducive to make a large scale kind of implementation. And you see some of these challenges are listed here. The government levies are high, and almost like 60 to 80% of the revenue goes in the levies itself. So very little is left to the operator to kind of absorb the costs that are required to implement a large EUR process. Then we know that, I mean, any EUR project, particularly like ASP, has a long gestation period, anywhere between 3 to 5 years. And the PSC terms, particularly because we are working in a PSC regime, the PSC terms and the PSC period comes as a hurdle because our PSC kind of expires in 2030. One of the other terms of the ER policy, at least for the IUR process, says that you will get incentive only after 60% recovery. But that's a very high number. I mean, we know that there are not many fields across the world which attain that kind of recoveries. So I think, I mean, this kind of term should be relooked. Also, the process of approval is quite kind of cumbersome. So just to conclude, as I said, all fields must be kind of evaluated. There is a lot of potential for EUR. All of us must kind of work towards it. Reservoir management must be given importance when you are doing an EUR. And we already looked at the EUR potential that is there in the MBA fields. And as a last, I mean, I would say that we need government support and attractive EUR kind of incentives and simpler policy to make a reality, I mean, to attain the kind of potential that has been identified. With that, I'll close. Thank you.